A space station called Varanthos Prime floated in the darkness between three star systems, and it served as the meeting place for dozens of alien species who had agreed to work together under something called the Galactic Coalition. Kira Voss stepped off the transport ship and took her first breath of recycled station air, and she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness running through her body. She was a human xenolinguist, which meant she studied alien languages and cultures, and she had spent 5 years training for assignments exactly like this one. But when she checked in at the Coalition offices, the administrator behind the desk looked at her with an expression that seemed almost like pity. "You are the new handler for the Velkorin subject?" the administrator asked, and his 4 eyes blinked in a pattern that Kira recognized as disbelief. "I prefer the term cultural liaison," Kira replied with a small smile. "And yes, I requested this assignment." The administrator made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a warning. 17 handlers before you," he said, while sliding a datapad across the desk, "and 6 of them are still recovering in medical facilities across the galaxy." Kira picked up the datapad and began scrolling through the files, and what she read made her heart beat a little faster. The subject was named Shyla, and she belonged to a species called the Velkrin that had only been contacted by the Coalition 2 years ago. The Velkrin were impressive beings, standing around 8 feet tall, with bodies covered in iridescent scales that shifted color depending on the light. They had 4 powerful arms and bioluminescent markings that ran along their skin, and these markings would glow and change color based on their emotional state. Shyla had been brought to the station as part of a cultural exchange program, but the word "brought" seemed to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Reading between the lines, Kira understood that Shyla had not exactly volunteered for this honor. The incident reports painted a terrifying picture. Shyla had thrown a Korvathi diplomat through a reinforced window during their first meeting, and she had only stopped because the vacuum seals kicked in before anyone died. She had crushed a security drone with her bare hands when it tried to scan her without permission. She had refused to eat for 11 days until they stopped drugging her food. She had learned enough Coalition Common to deliver extremely creative threats to anyone who entered her quarters. The Coalition called her feral and dangerous and uncontrollable, and there was talk of sending her back to her homeworld, in a stasis pod, or keeping her permanently sedated in a containment facility. Kira finished reading and handed the datapad back to the administrator. "Where is her quarters?" she asked. The administrator stared at her for a long moment before pointing down a corridor that led to the high-security section of the station. "Level 7, Section 12, Room 4, he said, "and I would recommend bringing security backup." "That will not be necessary," Kira said, and she walked away before he could argue. The journey to Level 7 took about 15 minutes, and with each step, Kira reviewed everything she knew about the Velkorin species. They were predators by evolution, with senses far sharper than any human could imagine. They lived in tight family groups called packs, and loyalty to the pack was the foundation of their entire society. They did not respond well to hierarchy imposed from outside, and they viewed any attempted dominance by strangers as a direct threat. Every single handler before Kira had tried the same approach: establish authority, set boundaries, demand compliance. And every single one had failed because they were treating Shyla like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be understood. Kira reached the door to Room 4 and took a deep breath. The door was reinforced with 3 layers of alloy designed to withstand ship-to-ship weapons fire, and there were warning signs in 6 languages telling her to wait for security escort. She pressed the entry request button instead. The door slid open, and Kira stepped inside. The room was large but sparse, with furniture that had been bolted to the floor, and walls that showed the marks of claws and fists. And there in the corner stood Shyla, She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, and Kira felt her breath catch in her throat at the sight of her. 8 feet of coiled muscle and shimmering scales, with 4 arms that ended in claws capable of tearing through metal, and eyes that glowed like molten gold in the dim light. Her bioluminescent markings were pulsing a deep, angry red, and a low, rumbling growl was building in her chest. Xyla moved faster than anything that large should have been able to move, and suddenly she was right in front of Kira, with her claws extended and her fangs bared. The growl became a roar that shook the walls. Kira did not flinch. She did not step back or raise her hands in defense or call for help. Instead, she walked past Xyla to an empty spot on the floor, sat down cross-legged, and pulled a ration bar from her pocket. She unwrapped the ration bar and took a bite, chewing slowly while looking at nothing in particular. Xyla stood frozen in place, her claws still extended, and her markings flickering with confusion. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. This small, soft creature, with no claws, and no scales, and no natural weapons, should have been screaming and running and begging for mercy. Instead, she was sitting on the floor, eating a snack, like she was waiting for a transport shuttle. "What are you doing?" Xyla finally demanded, and her voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Kira swallowed her bite of ration bar and looked up at the massive alien woman. "I am eating dinner," she said calmly, "and you are welcome to join me if you want." "You are not afraid," Xyla said, and it was not a question but rather an accusation. "Should I be?" Kira asked. Xyla bared her fangs again and flexed all 4 of her arms in a display meant to intimidate. "I have killed before," she growled, "and I could tear you apart before you could even scream." Kira nodded, as if Xyla had just told her the weather forecast. "I know," she said. "I read your file." "Then why do you not run?" Kira took another bite of her ration bar and thought about the question for a moment. "Because running would not help me," she said, "and because I am not here to fight you or control you, make you do anything you do not want to do." Xyla's markings flickered again, shifting from red to something closer to orange. "Then why are you here?" she asked. Kira finished her ration bar and folded the wrapper neatly before putting it back in her pocket. "I am here because everyone else gave up on you," she said, while meeting Xyla's glowing eyes without fear. "And I do not do that." She stood up slowly and brushed off her uniform. "I will come back tomorrow," she said, "and I will bring better food than ration bars." Then she walked to the door and pressed the exit button. "You are strange," Xyla called after her, "even for a human." Kira paused at the threshold and looked back over her shoulder. "You have no idea," she said, with a small smile, and then she was gone. Xyla stood alone in her quarters for a long time after that, her markings shifting through colors she had not felt in many months. They settled on was something close to curiosity. Kira kept her promise and returned the next day with a container of food from the human section of the station. She did not announce herself, or ask for permission, or bring security backup. She simply pressed the entry button and walked into Xyla's quarters like she belonged there. Xyla was waiting for her this time, crouched in the corner, with her golden eyes tracking every movement. Her markings were pulsing a wary yellow, and her claws were extended but not raised. Kira walked to the same spot on the floor where she had sat yesterday and lowered herself down. She opened the food container, and the smell of grilled meat and vegetables filled the room. "I brought something called a stir-fry," Kira said, while pulling out 2 sets of utensils, "and it is one of my favorite meals from Earth." Xyla did not move from her corner. "Why do you keep coming back?" she demanded, and her voice carried a hint of frustration beneath the words. "Roughness." "Because I said I would," Kira replied simply, and she began eating without waiting for Xyla to join her. This became their pattern over the following days. Kira would arrive at the same time each morning, and she would bring food or music or books, or sometimes just herself. She never gave orders or made demands or tried to establish any kind of authority. She simply existed in Xila's space and let the alien woman observe her. At first, Xyla tested her constantly. She would make sudden movements to see if Kira would startle. She would growl at random moments to check if Kira would show fear. She would knock things over and break furniture to see if Kira would call for help. But Kira never reacted the way Xyla expected. When Xyla lunged at her, Kira simply stepped aside and continued whatever she was doing. When Xyla growled, Kira would ask if she was feeling unwell. When Xyla destroyed a chair, Kira would comment that the furniture had been ugly anyway. "You are either very brave or very stupid," Xyla said one evening after a particularly aggressive display had failed to get any reaction. Kira looked up from the book she was reading and smiled. "My mother always said there was not much difference between the two," she replied. By the end of the second week, something began to shift. Xyla stopped crouching in the corner and started sitting closer to where Kira would set up. She stopped growling every time Kira spoke and started actually listening to what she said. She even tried some of the human food, though she made a face at the vegetables. "Why do humans eat plants?" she asked one day with genuine disgust in her voice. "Because they taste good and they keep us healthy," Kira said while popping a piece of broccoli into her mouth. "Plants are what food eats," Xyla muttered, and Kira laughed so hard she nearly dropped the broccoli. Choked. It was the first time Xyla had ever made a joke, and her markings flickered with something that looked almost like pleasure at the response. Kira began to share stories about Earth and about human culture, and Xyla listened with growing curiosity. She learned that humans came from a world with vast oceans and towering mountains and forests that stretched for thousands of miles. She learned that humans had fought wars against each other for most of their history, but had eventually learned to work together. She learned that humans valued something called family above almost everything else, and that family did not always mean blood relations. "We have a saying," Kira explained one evening, "that friends are the family you choose." Xyla's markings shifted to a color Kira had not seen before, something between blue and violet. "The Velcorin have a similar concept," Xyla said quietly, "but I did not think other species understood." "Tell me about it," Kira asked, and she set down her book to give Xyla her full attention. For the first time since arriving on the station, Xyla began to talk about her home. She spoke of her pack, a group of 23 Velcorin who lived together in the great forests of her world. She spoke of her mother, who led the pack with wisdom and strength, and her father, who taught her to hunt, and her siblings, who she had wrestled with since they were all small enough to fit in a single nest. She spoke of the day the coalition ships came down from the sky and asked for a representative to join their cultural exchange program. "I was chosen because I was young and strong and curious about the stars," Xyla said, and her voice had grown rough with emotion, "and I agreed to go because I thought it would bring honor to my pack." "What happened?" Kira asked gently. Xyla's markings turned a deep and painful red. "They did not tell me the next part," she said, her voice shaking. "Truth," she said, "and they did not treat me with honor." The story came out slowly, piece by piece, like shards of broken glass. Xyla had been sedated during transport, and woke up alone in a cold metal room with no explanation. When she asked to contact her pack, she was told that communication was not possible. When she asked to go home, she was told that the exchange program required a minimum stay of 5 years. When she tried to leave on her own, they restrained her. "Every time someone came to see me, they came to control me," Xyla said, and her claws were digging into the floor hard enough to leave marks. "And every time I resisted, they called me savage and dangerous and unfit for civilized contact." Kira felt anger burning in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "They were wrong," she said firmly, "and what they did to you was wrong." Xyla looked at her with something like surprise in her golden eyes. You believe me? She asked. Of course I believe you, Kira said. And more than that, I understand. She moved closer to Zayla. Close enough to touch, but not touching. You were not being aggressive, Kira said, and you were not being savage or feral, or any of those things they called you. Then what was I being? Zayla asked. Kira met her eyes without flinching. You were being protective, she said, and you were defending yourself the only way you knew how. Zayla went very still, and her markings began shifting through colors so quickly that Kira could not keep track of them. No one has ever understood that before, Zayla whispered. That is because no one bothered to ask, Kira said, and no one bothered to listen. She reached out slowly, giving Zayla plenty of time to pull away, and placed her small human hand on one of Zayla's massive clawed ones. You have been fighting because no one ever gave you a choice, Kira said, and you have been alone because no one ever tried to be your friend. Zayla's markings settled on a color that Kira had never seen before, something soft and deep and achingly sad. I miss my pack, Zayla said, and her voice cracked on the words. I know, Kira said, and she squeezed Zayla's hand gently. And I am so sorry. They sat together in silence for a long time after that. When Kira finally left for the night, she paused at the door and looked back. I cannot replace your pack, she said, but I can be your friend, if you will let me. Zayla's markings flickered with that strange violet color again. I would like that, she said quietly, and I think I would like that very much. Kira smiled and nodded. Then I will see you tomorrow, she said, and she meant it as a promise. When the door closed behind her, Zayla touched the spot on her hand where Kira's fingers had rested. It was such a small gesture, from such a small creature. But it was the first time anyone had touched her with kindness since she left home. Her markings glowed softly in the darkness, and for the first time in many long months, the color was something close to hope. Kira stood before the Coalition Council chamber and felt the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon her. The room was massive and circular, with seats rising in tiers around a central platform where she now stood alone. Representatives from 30 different species looked down at her, and most of their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. This is highly irregular, said Councillor Vreth of the Andrelian delegation, and his long neck swayed with agitation. We cannot simply grant freedom to a dangerous specimen based on the word of one human. She is not a specimen, Kira replied firmly, and she is not dangerous to anyone who treats her with basic respect. 6 hospitalized handlers would disagree, another counselor interjected. 6 handlers who tried to dominate and control her without understanding anything about her culture or her needs, Kira shot back, and 6 handlers who got exactly the response that anyone with basic understanding of her situation might expect. Knowledge of Velkarin psychology could have predicted. The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers. No one spoke to the council this way, and certainly not a junior human liaison who had only been on the station for a few weeks. But Kira was tired of being polite, while Zayla suffered. I am invoking Clause 17 of the Human Coalition Diplomatic Agreement, Kira announced, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber, which grants human cultural liaisons full responsibility and authority over their assigned charges. That clause was meant for Myra disputes, Councillor Vreth protested, and not for cases involving potential military assets. Zayla is not a military asset, Kira said through clenched teeth, and she is not property to be classified and reassigned. The Velkarin are a newly contacted species with significant martial capabilities, another voice said, and Kira recognized it as belonging to Admiral Korath of the Coalition Defense Force, and it would be foolish to ignore the strategic implications. Kira turned to face the Admiral directly. The strategic implications of treating a sapient being like a weapon? She asked coldly. and the strategic implications of showing every newly contacted species that the Coalition views them as resources to be exploited. The chamber went silent. "If I may speak," came a new voice, and everyone turned to see the human ambassador rising from her seat in the observation gallery. Ambassador Chen was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen more than most beings could imagine. She walked down to the central platform and stood beside Kira. "I have reviewed Liaison Voss's reports," Ambassador Chen said, "and I have also reviewed the original terms under which the Velcoran representative was brought to this station." She produced a datapad and projected its contents for the entire chamber to see. "Velcoran were promised a cultural exchange," Chen continued, "and they were promised that their representative would be treated with honor and would be free to return home at any time." "Those were preliminary terms," Councillor Vreth said quickly, "and they were subject to revision based on security concerns." "Revision without notification to the Velcoran government," Chen replied, "and revision that conveniently occurred after their representative was already in transit." More murmurs filled the chamber, and Kira saw several councillors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked a Korvathi representative. Kira stepped forward. "I am proposing that we honor our original agreements," she said, "and I am proposing that Zayla be given the freedom to move about the station, to make her own choices, and to be treated as a diplomatic guest rather than a prisoner. And if she hurts someone, demanded as, then I will take full responsibility," Kira said without hesitation, "and I will accept whatever consequences the council deems appropriate." The chamber erupted in argument, with councillors shouting at each other, and at Kira and at Ambassador Chen. But in the end, the vote passed by a narrow margin. Kira had won. She ran to Zyla's quarters to share the news, and when she burst through the door, she found the Velcoran woman pacing anxiously. "I heard there was a council session," Zyla said, and her markings were flickering with worry. "And I heard your name mentioned in the communications." "I have good news," Kira said breathlessly, "and I think you are going to like it." She explained everything: the council vote, the freedom of movement, the right to make her own choices. Zyla listened with her markings shifting through colors faster than Kira could track. "You did this for me?" Zyla asked when Kira finished. "You put yourself at risk for me?" "Of course I did," Kira said, "and I would do it again." Zayla was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she finally asked. "And why would a human care what happens to a Velcoran?" Kira reached out and took Zayla's hand the way she had done before. "Because you are my friend," she said simply, "and friends take care of each other." The next few weeks were transformative. Kira took Zayla everywhere on the station, and she watched with joy as the Velcoran woman experienced things she had never imagined. They visited the Arboretum first, and Zayla stood transfixed before flowers from 100 different worlds. Her markings glowed with colors of wonder and delight, and she reached out to touch the petals with a gentleness that would have shocked anyone who only knew her reputation. "We have forests on my world," Zayla said softly, "but I have never seen colors like these." They visited the observation deck and watched ships come and go from the station. Zayla pressed her face against the transparent wall, like a child seeing snow for the first time. "The stars look different from out here," she whispered, "and I never realized how beautiful they could be." Kira introduced Zayla to human music, and the Velcoran woman sat motionless for hours, listening to orchestral compositions. Her markings rippled with emotions that had no names, and when the music ended, she looked at Kira with something like reverence. "Your species created this?" she asked. "And you made these sounds just because they are beautiful?" "Yes," Kira said with a smile, "and we have been doing it for thousands of years." They discovered that Zayla loved chocolate after Kira shared a bar from her personal stash. The sound Zayla made when the sweetness hit her tongue was somewhere between a purr and a growl of pleasure, and Kira laughed until her sides hurt. Hurt, awed species on the station watched these interactions with disbelief and confusion. The monster was walking peacefully through public areas. The beast was asking questions about art and music. The untamable savage was laughing at human jokes and helping Kira carry her research materials. "How did you do this?" the Korvathi ambassador demanded one day when he saw Zyla and Kira sharing a meal in the common area. Kira looked up at him and shrugged. "I did not do anything special," she said, "and I just treated her like a person." The ambassador walked away shaking his head, unable to understand. But Zyla understood. She looked at Kira with markings glowing a warm and gentle gold. "You gave me something no one else even tried to give me," she said quietly. "What is that?" Kira asked. "A choice," Zyla replied, "and the chance to be myself." Kira smiled and reached across the table to squeeze her friend's hand. "That is what friends do," she said, "and I am glad I could help." They sat together in comfortable silence, two beings from different worlds who had somehow found each other. And watching from across the room, several other species began to wonder if maybe the humans knew something they did not. The peace shattered on a night when both moons of the nearest planet were dark. Kira woke to the sound of alarms, screaming through the station corridors, and she knew immediately that something was very wrong. She threw on her uniform and ran toward Jayla's quarters, but the corridors were blocked by security teams in full combat armor. "Stand aside," she demanded, "and let me through." "This area is restricted," the squad leader replied, and his voice was cold through his helmet speakers. "And you are ordered to return to your quarters." "What is happening?" Kira asked, and fear was beginning to claw at her chest. "The Velkarin subject has been reclassified as a military asset," the squad leader said, "and she is being transferred to Defense Force custody." Kira felt the blood drain from her face. "On whose authority?" she demanded. "The Directorate," came the reply, "and their orders supersede your diplomatic clause." About the Directorate. They were a faction within the coalition that believed in strength above all else, and they had been watching Jayla's transformation with hungry eyes. A Velkarin warrior who could be controlled would be an invaluable weapon, and they had finally made their move. Kira pushed past the guards and ran. She heard them shouting behind her, but she did not stop. She rounded a corner and saw what she had feared most. Jayla was cornered at the end of the corridor, surrounded by a dozen soldiers with weapons raised. But Jayla was not attacking. She was pressed against the wall with her arms raised in surrender, and her markings were flickering with colors of distress and confusion. The soldiers were firing stun rounds into her anyway. "Stop!" Kira screamed, and she threw herself between Jayla and the weapons. "And stand down immediately." "Step aside, human," the squad leader said while advancing toward her. "And you have no authority here." "She is surrendering," Kira said desperately, "and she is not fighting back." "The subject is too dangerous to transport without sedation," the squad leader replied, "and we have orders to neutralize any resistance." "She is not resisting," Kira shouted. But the soldiers kept firing, and Jayla made a sound of pain that cut through Kira's heart like a blade. Something inside Kira snapped. "You will have to go through me," she said, and she planted herself firmly between Jayla and the soldiers. The squad leader laughed. "You are unarmed and untrained," he said, "and you weigh less than one of my arms." "I do not care," Kira said, "and I am not moving." She reached behind her and found Jayla's hand, and she squeezed it tightly. "I am here," she whispered to her friend, "and I am not going to let them take you." "Kira, no," Jayla said weakly, "and you will get hurt." "Then I will get hurt," Kira replied. What happened next became legend on Varanthos Prime. Kira Voss, a human woman standing barely 5 feet and 6 inches tall, with no weapons and no armor and no military training whatsoever, faced down 12 armed soldiers and refused to yield. When they tried to push her aside, She pushed back. When they grabbed her arms, she twisted free. When they pointed weapons at her, she stared them down without flinching. She cited treaties and diplomatic protocols. She threatened political consequences from Earth's government. She activated an emergency broadcast that sent footage to every major news network in the coalition. And when all of that failed, she fought. She fought with everything she had, which was not much compared to soldiers in combat armor. They hit her, and she got back up. They threw her to the ground, and she climbed to her feet again. They broke her arm, and she stood on shaking legs, with tears streaming down her face, and still refused to move. "I will not let you take her," she said through a mouth full of blood. "And you will have to kill me first." The squad leader raised his weapon. And then the corridor filled with light. Ambassador Chen appeared at the head of a diplomatic emergency response team, and her voice rang out like thunder. "Stand down immediately," she commanded. "And that is an order from Earth's government." "The Directorate has authority here," the squad leader protested. "The Directorate just violated 17 different treaties," Chen replied coldly. "And I have already filed formal complaints with every member world of the coalition." She stepped forward and looked at the soldiers with eyes like ice. "This footage is being broadcast live to 3 billion viewers," she said. "And I suggest you think very carefully about your next action." The soldiers hesitated. Then, one by one, they lowered their weapons. And stepped back. Kira's legs finally gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. Zayla caught her before she hit the ground, gathering the broken human woman in her massive arms, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature her size. "You foolish, brave, stupid, wonderful human," Zayla whispered, and her markings were blazing with colors that had no translation. "Did it work?" Kira asked weakly. "And are you safe?" "I am safe," Zayla said, "and you saved me." "Good," Kira mumbled, "and that is good." Then she passed out from the pain. Zayla carried Kira to the medical bay herself, and she did not let anyone else touch her friend. She stood guard outside the treatment room for hours while the doctors worked, and her markings pulsed with colors that made everyone who saw them feel the depth of her emotions. Admiral Korath came to speak with her, and Zayla looked at him with eyes that glowed like dying stars. "She does not recover," Zayla said quietly, "and if anything happens to her because of what your people did—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The Admiral left very quickly. Ambassador Chen came next, and she sat down beside Zayla without fear. "She is going to be fine," Chen said, "and the doctors say she will make a full recovery." Zayla's markings flickered with relief. "She almost died for me," Zayla said, "and I do not understand why." Chen smiled sadly. "Because that is what humans do," she said, "and we protect the people we love, even when it costs us everything." "Love?" Zayla asked, and the words seemed to confuse her. "Not romantic love," Chen explained, "but the love of friendship and family and pack." She put a hand on Zayla's arm. "Kira chose you as her pack," Chen said, "and for humans, that bond is sacred." Zayla was quiet for a long time. When Kira finally woke up, days later, the first thing she saw was Zayla's face hovering over her. "Hey," Kira said weakly, "and how long was I out?" Zayla made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Too long," she said, "and I was so worried." Kira reached up with her good arm and touched Zayla's face. "I told you," she whispered, "and I said I do not give up." Zayla's markings glowed with that deep violet color again, and Kira finally understood what it meant. It meant love. It meant loyalty. It meant pack. "Thank you," Zayla said, "and I will never forget what you did for me." Kira smiled through her pain. "That is what friends are for," she said, "and I would do it all again." Outside the medical bay, the galaxy was watching, and something was beginning to change. The footage spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every major network carried the story, and every species in the coalition watched a small human woman stand against armed soldiers for the sake of an alien she had known for only a few months. Commentary exploded on every platform and in every language. The Andrelians could not understand it and called it irrational behavior. The Korvathi analyzed it as a strategic error that should have resulted in death. The Directorate tried to spin it as proof that humans were too emotional to be trusted with important decisions. But the footage spoke for itself. A woman bleeding on the floor, still placing her broken body between alien weapons and someone she called friend. The question everyone was asking was the same. Why would she do this? Why would any creature risk its life for someone who was not even the same species? What evolutionary advantage could such behavior suggest? Possibly serve? The Velkorin watched the footage too. Deep in the forests of their homeworld, Zayla's pack gathered around communication screens and saw what had happened to their daughter. They saw the human woman who had refused to abandon her. They saw the colors of Zayla's markings and understood their meaning in ways no other species could. And for the first time in their history, the Velkorin decided to leave their world. A delegation arrived at Veritas Prime 2 weeks after the incident, and their arrival caused a sensation that made the original controversy look small. 3 massive ships emerged from hyperspace and requested permission to dock. The Coalition scrambled to prepare because no one had ever seen Velkorin vessels before. When the delegation disembarked, the station went silent. 20 Velkorin warriors walked through the corridors in perfect formation, their markings glowing with colors of purpose and point. Determination. They were led by a female who stood even taller than Zayla, with silver patterns woven through her scales that marked her as an elder. They walked directly to the medical bay, where Kira was still recovering. Zayla met them at the entrance, and she dropped to her knees before the elder. "Mother," she said, and her voice broke with emotion. The elder reached down and lifted Zayla to her feet, pulling her into an embrace that seemed to last forever. "My daughter," she said, "and I am so sorry we could not come sooner." Then the elder turned to look at Kira, who was sitting up in her hospital bed, with her arms still in a healing cast. "You are the human," the elder said, and it was not a question. "Yes," Kira replied, and she tried to stand, but her legs were still too weak. The elder raised a hand to stop her. "Do not rise," she said, "and you have earned the right to rest." She moved closer to Kira's bed. The other Velkorin followed in formation. "I am Valith," the elder said, "and I am the mother of Zayla and the leader of our pack." "It is an honor to meet you," Kira said, "and Zayla has told me so much about you." Valith's markings flickered with warmth. "And she has told us about you," she said, "and we have seen what you did for her." She reached out and placed a massive clawed hand on Kira's shoulder with surprising gentleness. "We came here for one reason," Valith continued, "and we came to meet the human who showed our daughter the meaning of pack." Kira felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I just tried to be her friend," she said. "Yes," Valith agreed, "and that is exactly what we mean." The elder turned to address the room, and her voice carried the weight of ancient authority. "In Velkorin culture, there is a bond called Kethral," she said, "and it is the highest honor one can bestow." "Blood," Zayla added, "and it transcends species and distance and even death." "It has never been offered to an outsider in all our history," Valith said, "and we have come to change that." The Velkorin delegation parted, and Zayla walked forward to stand before Kira's bed. Her markings were blazing with colors that seemed to contain every emotion at once. She knelt on the floor and bowed her head. "Kira Voss, of Earth," Zayla said, and her voice trembled with the weight of the words. "And you saw me when others saw a monster. You stood when others ran," she continued, "and you bled for me when you owed me nothing. You gave me choice when others gave me chains. You gave me friendship when I had only known fear. And you gave me hope when I had forgotten what it meant. She looked up at Kira with eyes that glowed like twin suns. "I offer you Kethral," Jayla said, "and I offer you the bond of chosen family. Yours and you are mine," she continued, "and this bond will hold across stars and silence and the ending of all things. Will you accept?" Kira was crying openly now, and she could not find words at first. She reached out with her good hand and took Jayla's massive clawed fingers in her own. "Yes," she whispered, "and I accept with all my heart." Jayla's markings exploded into colors that no human had ever witnessed. Colors of joy and devotion and eternal loyalty. She rose and pulled Kira into a careful embrace, mindful of her injuries, but unwilling to let go. "My sister," Jayla whispered. "My sister," Kira replied. The delegation stayed on Varanthos Prime for a week, and during that time, everything changed. The Valkoran announced that they would open diplomatic relations with the Coalition, but only if certain conditions were met. They demanded that all newly contacted species be treated with dignity and choice. They demanded respect for cultural autonomy and self-determination. They set forth a framework that would allow for mutual growth and collaboration across the stars. Demanded that the Directorate be investigated for their actions. And they demanded that humans be given a seat on the newly formed First Contact Committee. "Why humans?" the Council asked. Valeth's answer was simple. "Because they understand what we value," she said, "and they know that strength without compassion is just cruelty." The news networks ran stories about the human way of diplomacy for months afterward. Species across the galaxy debated what it meant that a small soft creature with no natural weapons had achieved what armies could not. Some called it luck. Some called it foolishness. But others began to understand. Humanity's power was not in strength or technology or numbers. It was in something much simpler. The willingness to see others as worthy of care. The stubborn refusal to abandon those they loved. The courage to stand for what was right, even when it cost everything. Historians wrote about the moment the galaxy changed. They always returned to the same image. A small human woman, sitting on the floor eating a ration bar, while an 8-foot warrior watched in confusion. A small human woman bleeding on the corridor floor, with her body between weapons and her friend. A small human woman crying with joy as she accepted a bond that would last forever. Kira Voss never thought of herself as special. She was just someone who refused to give up. But that, the galaxy learned, was what made humans terrifying. That was what made them wonderful. And that was what made Zayla finally understand what it meant to have a pack again. They stood together on the observation deck on the day the Valkoran delegation departed. Kira had her arm around Zayla's waist, and Zayla had one massive arm draped gently over Kira's shoulders. "Will you visit my homeworld someday?" Zayla asked. "Yes," Kira said. "And I cannot wait to see your forests." Zayla's markings glowed with contentment. "The pack is eager to meet you properly," she said, "and my siblings want to teach you to hunt." Kira laughed. "I am a terrible hunter," she admitted. "That does not matter," Zayla said, "and what matters is that you are family now." They watched the stars in comfortable silence. Two beings from different worlds, two sisters by choice, and a bond that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The untamable had been won over, not by force or fear or dominance, but by something far more powerful, by kindness, by patience, by love, and that, the universe finally understood, was the human way.